to accumulate that metabolic damage. Their brains are still really responsive and flexible. So wouldn't it be something if you could dramatically improve or put into remission a serious mental illness in children simply by following whole foods principles?
Welcome back to another episode of the Peak Performance Life podcast. Today, I am very excited to be speaking about one of my favorite topics, and we have an expert. Her name is Dr. Georgia Eid. She is an internationally recognized expert in nutrition and metabolic psychiatry. Her 25 years of clinical experience include 12 years at Smith College and Harvard University Health Services, where she was the first to offer students nutrition-based approaches as an alternative to psychiatric medication. I absolutely love that. She co-authored the first inpatient study of the ketogenic diet for treatment-resistant mental illness. She developed the first medically accredited course in ketogenic diets for mental health practitioners and was named a recipient of the Bazuki Brain Research Fund's Metabolic Mind Award. Her new best-selling book, Change Your Diet, Change Your Mind, was recommended in April by the New York Times Book Review, and it's a topic that I absolutely love. Doctor, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you very much for having me, Tiller.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your background and how you got interested into this line of work and kind of figured out these connections here.
I think like a lot of my colleagues who I stumbled into nutrition interventions quite accidentally. And one of the main reasons I wrote the book was because I'm really tired of people having to stumble into these interventions. I think it's really the time is long overdue for people to be offered these approaches from day one when they walk into their practitioner's office, whether it's for a mental health condition or a physical health condition, to start with, really a food first approach, with the exception of, certain conditions, which may be, crisis or emergency situations where medications or hospitalization can certainly be useful. I think in all other cases, why not begin by laying a really strong nutritional foundation for all the cells in your body, including the cells of your brain?
Yes.
I stumbled into it through my own health challenges. I was practicing the way most psychiatrists practice, the way I was trained to practice for the first 10 years of my work. I prescribed medications and did psychotherapy, loved my work, learned a lot from my patients, developed meaningful relationships with my patients. But I honestly, no matter what I did, and no matter how hard I worked, most of my patients were not getting that much better. And this wasn't just my practice. You could say, well, I hadn't been practicing for that long at that point, but this was true for my colleagues, including very senior colleagues who had been in practice for decades. We had come to think of mental health conditions as chronic, mysterious, and incurable. And so we weren't taught to expect recovery. We weren't taught to even aim for recovery. And now with these new principles, nutrition and metabolic principles, these are really powerful interventions. And we are seeing now in more cases than you would expect, even in very serious mental illnesses, complete recovery, lasting recovery from these conditions with less, or in some cases, no medication whatsoever. So these are empowering interventions that we really want to put in the hands of patients and clinicians as soon as possible.
That's amazing. I absolutely love that. And so there's been a couple books written about like the gut-mind connection and, kind of what's an easy way or what's a way that we can explain this to listeners right now about how what you eat can actually affect how you feel, your mood, all sorts of things like that?
So there are a lot of different bridges between our food choices and our mental health. So the first is, of course, the gut. So that's the first interface, the first interaction that your food comes into contact with your body through your gut. And so the gut is a very complex system. There's the microbiome, of course, which is, these trillions of bacteria that are inside the gut. And we spend a lot of time thinking about those. This is a very exciting area of research, and it's really captured the imagination of a lot of scientists and the general public. And then, but there are other layers of gut health that we don't pay enough attention to, in my opinion, because the microbiome we don't fully understand yet. It's intriguing, it's communicating, and there's this sort of two-way communication between the microbes, the bacteria in your gut and your brain. Lots of different ways that they communicate with each other. Very important, but we don't fully understand yet how the foods we eat affect the microbiome and therefore affect brain health. We're still at this very, very early stage in that research. But in the meantime, we have a wealth of information about how the foods we eat break down in the gut, what those processes are, what the enzymes are that your pancreas releases, how the intestinal cells absorb nutrients from your food, and how the digestive process works, and which foods are hard to digest, which foods are easiest to digest, which foods have the most nutrients that you can extract, and which foods are harder to extract nutrients from. We have a lot of information about how the foods we eat affect our gut health and how our gut interacts with those foods. This, I think, is an area that doesn't get enough attention, and it's really fundamental. So if we're eating foods, for example, that are hard to digest, then that could cause a lot of gastrointestinal discomfort. And a lot of patients with mental health conditions have gastrointestinal issues. People with mental health conditions are much more likely to have a lot of gastrointestinal problems. So one of them is just poor digestion in general, discomfort, bloating and pain and that sort of thing, chronic constipation, all kinds of issues. That's a sign that the foods you're eating are not digesting properly. And while the microbiome has something to do with it, these other pieces of the puzzle are actually really much easier to understand and much easier to address if you understand which foods are most easiest to digest and which foods are most nutritious. So that's a long-winded way of saying that if we start by understanding just the most fundamental elements of digestion and what's in food and how our body extracts nutrients from food, you can make some very simple changes to your diet that can not only improve the health of your gut within days, but can improve the nutrients that are delivered to your brain in days. And so then your mental health and your digestive health will feel so much better because you've now used the right information about food to make changes that are actually worth making. The changes that we hear about for the microbiome are not really quite yet ready for prime time.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm certainly a big believer in just things that you can do, right? I mean, there's so many things too. There's food, there's getting, for me, it's like if I get a little sunlight in the morning, if I put my bare feet in the grass. Recently, I mean, it's so noticeable. I bought a cold plunge. Of course, I had to jump on the cold plunging bandwagon, and I started cold plunging just 3 minutes a day. And I don't think I've ever felt better. I mean, I'm eating really good. I'm exercising regularly, and then I'm doing the cold plunge, and I'm doing, a lot of other things as well. But I just feel a noticeable difference. So it's clear that there are these other things we can do. And now, are there any, what are some examples in your practice maybe, or some studies that you've come across, or what are some kind of how can we prove it to people? Me saying, hey, I feel great is one thing, but how can we actually, prove it? Or what are some examples that you've seen in your practice?
Yeah, so as you were saying, the brain is paying attention to all aspects of your lifestyle, not just your diet. Of course, diet is very, very important, but it's certainly not the only piece of the puzzle to pay attention to. We need sunlight, we need fresh air, we need exercise, we need strong relationships, we need love, we need connection, we need meaningful activities, we need purpose. We need play. We need sleep. We need all these pieces are really important.
Yeah.
The aspect that the focus of my research and my clinical work is the nutrition piece, but I absolutely agree with you that these other pieces are very important as well.
Yeah,
So
I will say real quick, the foundation of everything, how I healed myself 11 years ago now, that was all through nutrition and what I put in my body. So yeah, I also, haven't eaten gluten or fried foods. I don't drink alcohol. I'm very, very particular about what I put in my body as well. So I should say that's really the foundation. And then I just like doing these other things to see how much better can I feel. And they seem to work.
exactly. And so I really encourage people to adopt a curiosity mindset and explore all of these different lifestyle changes, including, of course, nutrition changes, to see how far these things can take you. Because if you don't change anything, nothing's going to change.
Right.
And you've got a lot of control over a lot of these variables. So the nutrition piece is the focus of my work. And, the reason why I wrote the book is because I want to empower people with information they can use right away that can help them feel better, in many cases within days to weeks. And these are as we're saying, these are really powerful interventions, and they have the potential to turn things around for people, in some cases quite quickly, even very serious mental health conditions. So I've put a lot of case examples in the book, different types of psychiatric conditions, many of them resolving again within days to weeks of making these most impactful nutrition changes. And I also did research in this field, and I was a co-author on a paper in 2022 where my friend and colleague, Dr. Albert Janat, who's a psychiatrist practicing in Toulouse, France for more than 35 years now, he invited 31 of his most treatment-resistant patients with schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and severe major depression to come into the hospital as volunteers to try a mildly ketogenic diet, whole foods diet, ketogenic, under his supervision in the hospital to see if it would be helpful. And these were people who were eager to do this because they had been ill already for an average of 10 years, some for as long as 30 years. They were taking on average 5 psychiatric medications when they came into the hospital. And all of them had been hospitalized before with minimal improvement. So, and these were all adults. And so what happened was 28 of those 31 adults were able to stay with the diet for 2 weeks or longer, which is what you need to do to start to see benefits. And all 28 of those individuals improved psychiatrically as well as metabolically, in terms of their metabolic health, their weight, their blood pressure, their blood sugar, their triglycerides, their liver function, just across the board, really excellent improvements. But when we looked at and we see that time and time again with ketogenic diet studies, because ketogenic diet is really good for metabolic health. But what we didn't necessarily expect to see was 100% of people who followed the diet improving, and 43% of them achieving clinical remission from their primary psychiatric diagnosis, and 64% of them leaving the hospital on less psychiatric medication, because you don't see results like that in conventional psychiatric care. And if this simple whole foods, low carbohydrate diet could help people with 10, 20, 30 years of serious psychiatric illness recover, imagine what it could do, and what it does do in my practice and in my colleagues as well, for people with sort of more common everyday mental health conditions like ADHD and generalized anxiety and major depression of milder nature. I've got cases in the book, people with early Alzheimer's disease, people who have had bipolar disorder for many years, people with binge eating disorder, people with food addiction, people with lifelong anxiety, turning their ships around relatively quickly simply by having the right information about how to feed the brain properly.
It's amazing. I'm smiling so big on the inside as well as on the outside. Like, just to hear also that there's a group of doctors like yourself who are treating people and not just saying, oh, okay, they have ADHD, let's just prescribe something right away. It's like, hey, well, would you be open to trying something else? Like, most of the time you don't even think of in psychiatry, like someone asking, what are you eating? What are your habits? Things of that nature, right? And so it's just really a breath of fresh air that you're doing this. Do you think has to do with like these inflammatory foods are causing inflammation in the brain, and is that kind of lowering the inflammation in the body would also lower the inflammation in the brain? Or what do you think are sort of like the mechanisms behind why a low carbohydrate whole food diet seems to work so well for so many different benefits?
Well, for 75 years, really since the 40s or 50s, we were taught that the root causes, the biological root causes of mental health conditions, were chemical imbalances. Imbalances in neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine. And we were taught, I trained to become a psychiatrist in the late 1990s and early 2000s. I was taught to address those chemical imbalances with psychiatric medication. But what we've really come to understand in the past, 10, 15 years, we know so much more now than we used to about the deeper root causes of mental health conditions. So if you look beyond the chemical imbalances, yes, the chemical imbalances can play a role in certain mental health conditions and some more than others. So it's not that they're not important at all. It's just that, well, what's causing those chemical imbalances in the first place?
That's right.
And what can we do about that? Because the medications don't work very well. The medications can be very helpful in some cases. There's still a role for them in clinical practice. I still use them in my practice, but they honestly fail most people. And even when they do help, they bring with them a whole litany of potential side effects, including in some cases, the most effective medications we have, which are the so-called antipsychotic medications. These medications come at a tremendous risk to metabolic health. Dozens of pounds of weight gain, 100, 200 milligrams per deciliter increase in blood triglyceride levels, high blood pressure, high blood sugar, type 2 diabetes, insulin resistance. Within weeks of starting these medications, people's health can decline. And so that's a big price to pay. Yeah. So, we now understand that if you look deeper behind the neurotransmitter imbalances, you see, as you were saying, inflammation of the brain. I mean, you can't feel it or see it. It's not that you can see your brain is getting red or swollen or sore, because the brain doesn't have nerve endings and it's encased in bone and you can't see what's happening. But the brain becomes inflamed just like the rest of the body does. So inflammation is underlying these conditions, something called oxidative stress, which is why we're told to eat more antioxidants, which actually is a strategy that doesn't really work. But we're told to eat more antioxidants, superfoods with more antioxidants to try to fight off this oxidative stress, and insulin resistance, which now the vast majority of Americans have insulin resistance or pre-diabetes, or just another way of saying high insulin levels. We're kind of leading a high insulin lifestyle. Too many of the wrong foods too often, not enough exercise, eating too frequently, eating too much, and eating all the wrong foods. That can cause high insulin levels and insulin resistance. And these are the real drivers of most of the physical and mental health conditions that we are facing as a society. So if you look at the standard diet that most people are eating now, you don't need to really look any further to find all the ingredients you need to create inflammation and oxidative stress and insulin resistance in the brain and the rest of the body as well. So before you start adding things like medications and antioxidant supplements and things like that, which all have their place, the first thing is, why don't you try taking some things away, taking some things away that are causing that harm in the first place, and see how far that will take you, and then decide what else you might need to do. So kind of a first do no harm approach. There's so much power in subtraction.
Yes.
We think of addition. Our first instinct is let's add something. Let's add this superfood, or let's add this supplement, or let's add this medication, but again, those strategies can be useful, but the most powerful place to begin is to kind of clean the slate and take these things out of our lives that are causing us harm in the first place.
Yes, I 100% agree with that. And it's kind of, when I tell people, what do I eat? I'm like, well, I don't eat bread or pasta or seed oils, fried foods. I don't drink alcohol. I don't eat processed, carbs and sugars. And it's that's about it. I can almost eat almost everything else if I just eliminate, like you said, take out those big culprits. But I also want to ask you, what are maybe some big culprits that you see? So now people are probably listening now, they're wondering, okay, so like what, tell me exactly, like what are some of the biggest culprits that could be affecting my mental health that maybe I should take out?
Well, so to Laura, it was such a perfect example what you just said. You said, I don't eat this, I don't drink this, I don't eat this, I don't drink this. And you say, well, oh, that's really simple. And if I take these things out, then I can. It sounds really simple, but as you know, this is very different from how most people are eating. And these changes, taking these things away, is hard because it involves, of course, avoiding all of the ultra processed foods that we're surrounded by and have become addicted to, that are so convenient and so cheap and so ultra tasty. And we were raised on these foods. I mean, I grew up in the 70s. I was raised on these foods. They're really hard to let go of for just almost everybody I know. Most of my patients, myself, my family members, my friends, these are hard things to do. But there's tremendous freedom in once you take that step and you realize how much better you can feel, then you really want to keep going with it. But I think you should really give yourself some credit for the changes you've made, because they're not easy changes to make. These whole foods principles, which are so powerful, a lot of people look at whole foods diets and think, well, how would I ever, do without bread for the rest of my life, or do without candy or soda, whatever it is that they have really become attached to. So yes. So you said, what are some of the most powerful changes you can make, the most impactful changes? So if I had to pick 5, they would be grains, legumes, refined carbohydrates. So legumes are beans, peas, and lentils. So grains, like corn, rice, wheat, oats. Legumes, which are the beans, peas, and lentils. Refined carbohydrates, sugar, flour, cereal products, fruit juices. Really all the crystals and powders and liquids and syrups, right? And refined vegetable oils, the so-called vegetable oils, which are the seed oils. These are soybean oil and sunflower oil and canola oil and corn oil, and all of the oils we're told are heart healthy because they have no cholesterol, no saturated fat, and they come from plants. These are some of the most dangerous fats you can consume, and these cause a lot of oxidative stress in the brain. And then alcohol. So red wine is not a brain healthy beverage. There's no study showing that if you have a mental health problem and you increase your wine intake, that you will improve your mental health. So all of the things you said, and I don't recall what you said about grains and legumes, but this is the reason why I include the grains and legumes, is because I think it's a really impactful change that people can make to the foundation of their diet that can make a really big difference. These foods are relatively low in nutrients and really high in anti-nutrients, which make it harder for us to absorb nutrients from those foods as well as other foods we consume along with them. And they're very high in starch, in carbohydrate. And the more starch you eat, the more insulin you need to produce, and the more likely you are to become insulin resistant. So Some people do better with those foods than others, but unless you're sure that they're not raising your glucose and insulin levels, it's easy for me to recommend that people set them aside because there are very few reasons to eat them and lots of reasons to avoid them.
Yeah, yeah. And actually so back in 2013, listeners know my story. I'll just recap it for you real quick. I had so much pain and inflammation in my fingers, hands, wrists, arms that I literally had to use a voice dictation software for 2 years. And I healed myself by literally eventually realizing that this is inflammation, and inflammation comes from what I put inside my body. So I started researching, low inflammatory diet, and I came across like the paleo diet. And so I also don't eat the grains and legumes because that's paleo people don't eat those foods. It sounds like what you describe is it's very similar to mine. It's like a paleo keto-ish diet. I wouldn't say that I'm, super hardcore keto, like less than 20 grams of carbs per day, but I'm certainly less than 100 grams of carbs, per day. And yeah, it's a really interesting one with the grains and legumes, right? Because it's like for so many years, people go to doctors and they're like, oh, well, eat oatmeal every morning to keep your cholesterol down, right? I think there was a continuous glucose monitor company called Levels. They sell CGMs now, and they said that 70% of their people who wear CGMs who ate oatmeal for breakfast had really high abnormal spikes in their blood glucose levels, right? So that right there, 7 out of 10. So maybe you're one of the 3 out of 10 lucky ones that didn't get it, but chances are, it's really something to look out for. And then beans is another one because people are like, oh, beans are a plant, and vegans eat tons of beans, and isn't it a great source of protein, right? And so I've always just been very cautious as well. I mean, anytime there's a food where they make up a song about how it makes beans are good for your heart, the old song, it's like, well, why would I want to eat something that makes me fart? Doesn't sound like that's good for my gut. But yeah, so those ones are really kind of controversial in terms of what old school medicine has taught us over the years. But they're quite interesting.
Well, I love that I was actually familiar with your story, the inflammation story. I was already familiar with, but it helps me to understand that you follow a paleo pattern because and that you're not necessarily keto. And this is really important because in the book, it's not just about ketogenic diets for mental health. There are 3 plans in the book because not everybody wants to do a ketogenic diet and not everybody needs to do a ketogenic diet. So the starting place on the roadmap that I have in the book is a paleo diet. And it's kind of modified in a few unique ways to be a little, I call it quiet paleo. It's got, I've removed a few additional foods from the diet beyond standard paleo to be a little quieter on the nervous system and quieter on the gut and quieter on insulin levels and things like that, quieter on the immune system. But it has about 90 grams of carbohydrate in it per day. So you can have some, fruit or starchy vegetable with every meal if you like, and see how that goes, right? So that I think that's a really great place for everyone to start. And if it doesn't bring you enough relief, then you can explore the possibility of a ketogenic version of that same pattern. And if that doesn't bring you enough relief, the third pattern in the book to explore for those who are open to it is a carnivore diet, also ketogenic version of that. And there's lots of room for personalization along the way. But one of the things that I want to, I don't know if anybody in your audience prefers a plant-based diet, but this is where the legumes become very important. So if, without the animal foods, without the animal protein, people will need to either supplement very carefully with amino acids, or they're going to need to include legumes in their diet. So things like soy and buckwheat and quinoa, which are better sources of amino acids than other foods are, plant foods are. So everybody needs to decide where they want to draw that line. But there are risks involved in including the legumes in the diet. And so for people who are choosing plant proteins over animal proteins because they think they're healthier, I just want to set the record straight in the book that that's not the case. But I'm also nutritionally pro-choice. And so I really want everybody, regardless of their dietary preferences, to be able to improve the brain healthiness of their diet.
Mm-hmm.
And there are lots of changes people can make. Like you and I were saying, it's not necessarily ketogenic. It's not going to necessarily be necessary for everybody. And for a lot of people, keto is just a non-starter, right? So
Mm-hmm.
people are like, I'm never going to do that. And I go, okay, that's fine. Here are some other really impactful changes that you could explore. So it's about choice, but it's also about informed choice, having the right information so that the changes you make are worth making. Most
Yes.
of the changes that we hear about, things like putting blueberries on top of your oatmeal and that sort of thing, having more dark chocolate or drinking more red wine or eating more flax seeds or whatever the superfood of the day is, those things don't work. And when people try those strategies and they don't work, they think, oh, well, diet doesn't matter. I've tried all those things, right? Diet makes a tremendous difference. You're a perfect living example of this. Diet is a powerful strategy for improving mental and physical health. It's just that, these dietary changes can help you in ways no medicine can, but you
Right.
have to know which changes are the right ones to make. And they're not the ones we're usually hearing about.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. What are some, and I think also, with kids, it's a tough one as well. I have two daughters, and knowing what I know about health, it's just like I'm crying inside, but sometimes just have to let it slide. It's really difficult, but I try to do certain things that I can, and try to at least my daughter. There's never been any soda or sugary drinks in the house, so they're
Mm.
not drinking things like that. They're again, and even like when people are like, it's very interesting, going back to the keto thing real quick, is keto was a huge, like a few years ago, every health expert was writing books about keto, and it was a keto craze and everyone was on keto. Although I used to go to soccer games and hear other parents talking, oh yeah, I'm trying keto. And then a few minutes later, I'd see them eating like a bag of chips. And I'm like, what's going on here? This is not, I don't think you really understand what keto means. You can't be half in and half out, on that kind of a thing. But it's interesting how there's so many benefits. We know, like for brain health, there's a whole book called The End of Alzheimer's that basically is mainly about eating ketogenic types of oils and foods and things like that. And yet we know it's reversing diabetes in addition to the mental health aspects of it. And yet recently, the search volume, I track all these things, the search volume's been going way down for keto and ketogenic. And it's almost like people forgot about these. And then the other problem was that people were like, oh, I'm going to go keto. And then they go on Amazon and buy like a keto cereal or something. It's like a packaged good. And it's like, no, that's not the right way to do it either. That's not a real whole food that you're doing there as well. So, I personally, I'm always eating like I'm prioritizing my diet around healthy proteins and fats. And
Yes.
then that way I'm satiated by the proteins and healthy fats, right? The olive oils, the, coconut oils or whatever it is. And I'm satiated by those. And that way I'm not starving for carbohydrates. We had someone not too long ago on the podcast who has a satiety index per calorie showing
Dr.
how
Ted
proteins,
Naiman.
Dr. Ted
Mm-hmm.
Naiman, yes, exactly. Talking about specifically how protein is very satiating and carbohydrates are not. And that's why you can keep eating more and more and more. So while everyone is counting calories and thinking that all calories are the same, they're not, because some calories make you not hungry anymore and other calories you still want to eat more. So yeah, it's really, really fascinating.
It is. It's about hormones, right? So
Yeah.
we've been taught for our entire lives to think about calories. And we've been taught for our entire lives to divide fats into saturated and unsaturated. And we've been taught for our lives to divide proteins into animal and plant proteins. We've been taught these very strange rules that make no biological sense.
Right.
And so what we really need to be focusing on is, okay, where are the nutrients that we need? Which foods contain those nutrients? And not just contain them, but which foods contain accessible, bioavailable, absorbable user-friendly forms of those nutrients. So it's not just because for a lot of plant foods, just because a plant food contains a nutrient doesn't necessarily mean you can access it easily, which is not the case with most animal nutrients. So animals versus plants, there are many reasons to recommend that the core of the diet contain animal food rather than be based on starchy grains and legumes. The saturated fat versus unsaturated fat is ridiculous because all whole foods contain a mixture of saturated and unsaturated fats. We need to be taught to focus on dividing fats into natural whole fats and processed refined fats. That's a much more important thing to learn how to do. And then, when it comes to calories, the body doesn't count calories. The body is looking at nutrients and the body's looking at energy coming in. Right. And food is information about your environment. So when you eat, if you eat 100 calories of, say, salmon versus 100 calories of oatmeal, those are two very different foods. And they're going to have very different effects on your insulin levels and many other things as well. But focus on insulin. First of all, the salmon's got a lot more protein. That's going to be a lot more satisfying. It's also has many, many more of the nutrients you need, just about every one you do need, whereas the oatmeal is extraordinarily poor source of essential nutrients. So after you eat the oatmeal, not only are you going to be hungrier and still looking for more protein and still looking for more micronutrients, your insulin levels are also going to go up and your glucose level is going to go up. And that's going to set you on this hormonal roller coaster for hours afterward that can destabilize your brain chemistry, your appetite hormones, your stress hormones, your reproductive hormones, your blood pressure regulating hormones. All of these hormones are paying attention to glucose and insulin levels. And so if you understand which foods are working on your behalf and which foods are working against you, you can have tremendous control, not just over your appetite and your health and your nutritional status, but over your hormonal balance and the balance of the chemicals in your brain. Because what's destabilizing your brain chemistry is that you're eating foods that are literally destabilizing you from within. And so they're making you more anxious. They're making you hungrier. They're making you depressed. They're making you tired. And so they're not serving you well. And so of course you're not going to feel good. And it's not your fault. You just have the wrong information about what a healthy breakfast is supposed to look like.
Right. Right. And I know you go into a lot more detail. I highly, highly recommend. I love the name, by the way, of your book, Change Your Diet, Change Your Mind. I think it's just so spot on. I'm sure you go in much, much deeper, in terms of what foods you like and what. But for the listeners now, what are some of you mentioned one of my favorite dinners, salmon, is one of my favorite dinners that I eat at least probably 3 times a week, if not more. And I could eat it every night. What are some of the other foods that you love to recommend to people for this diet?
Yeah, so we'll start with people who prefer a plant-based diet, where by plant-based, let me be clear about that. If people prefer a vegetarian diet, it's if you can include eggs in that diet and enough eggs, you will be meeting most of your requirements for most essential nutrients. The one that you will really need to be more careful with, well, there are 2 nutrients that are very low or missing in eggs, and that's vitamin C and iron. But you can get vitamin C from the other plant foods in your diet. The iron, you will need to take some extra steps to make up for that deficit in eggs. Whereas meat, seafood, and poultry will give you all of the essential nutrients that you need, plus really high quality protein. So the core of the diet can be just really, really any animal food that you feel comfortable including in the diet, or else you're going to need to supplement carefully and plan your diet carefully, which can be done. And then I sort of think of it as a core and then moving out. So the core is, adequate animal source protein with their natural fats.
Mm,
And then not to be afraid of those, because the fat also contains some fat soluble nutrients, and including omega-3 fatty acids, which the brain needs and the immune system needs. So, and all of your micronutrients and vitamins and minerals and so forth. So high quality protein, everything else, and very satisfying, and will not spike your glucose to dangerous levels. It's
right.
incapable. These foods are incapable of doing that. When you
Yeah.
go just outside that core, you've got the fruits and vegetables. And this is where there's a lot of room for personalization.
Hmm.
And I walk people through that in the book so that they understand which fruits and vegetables are most worth including if they choose to, and which are more risk than benefit, because there are some that are not necessarily as good for you. And understanding that not all fruits and vegetables are created equal is kind of important, because we're
Yeah.
told, okay, eat a rainbow of fruits and vegetables and they're all equally good for you. And the more you eat, the better. But there are actually some that do work against you. And especially if you've got a mental health condition, you may want to be careful with, for example, nightshades,
Yes.
things like eggplants and peppers and tomatoes. And
Hmm.
they contain natural neurotoxins. Cassava root, which is becoming more popular in
Mm,
health food substitutes, as a gluten-free flour, as a grain-free, kind of paleo-friendly flour to make chips and things out of. Does contain trace amounts of cyanide, which is a mitochondrial poison. Um,
wow.
People need to understand these differences, right? So, not
Yeah.
to scare people away from all plant foods, but just to have people understand the differences. So, you've got the animal foods in the center, and then you've got fruits and vegetables, the ones that you like and that you digest easily and that aren't going to raise your blood sugar too much. You'll have to check for yourself, and I show you how to do that to see, you know, if you can understand what your personal carbohydrate tolerance is, how
Yeah.
much of that you can include, safely include. And then outside of that, you get things like nuts and dairy products, which are very nutritious, but they're a little risky in terms of digestive health and immune health and things like that. And then everything else outside of that. So things like the grains and the legumes and all the ultra processed foods and the vegetable oils and all
Yeah.
of that, the refined carbohydrates, all of that should be floating outside of this sort of healthy planet that we've built here as kind of space junk. And you can just set all that aside, and the less of those things you eat, the better off you'll be. And these rules are very simple. And I know they don't sound, I mean, your viewers are probably very well aware that this all makes sense, but the average person who doesn't follow nutrition science closely has a very different set of rules in their head
Yeah.
that is really, in so many cases, especially saying in children, is really laying the foundation for poor mental health without people realizing it. So just understanding the basic principles of what a brain healthy diet should look like is, I think, very empowering, and allows a lot of people to do more with less medication.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was going to go back to the kids because I think that's one that I'm sure a lot of parents listening are concerned about or thinking about. And I'll say, with two daughters of my own, it's certainly challenging, but I think, simple things like eliminating any kind of sugar drinks from your house, right? Is an easy first step, right? But it's just, yeah, like trying to, what I find is like kind of, it's like out of sight, out of mind. I just try to keep it out of the house. I mean, look, when I was growing up, my father would say, what do you want for dinner, Burger King or McDonald's? It was horrible. It was just, but they were right around the corner and they were easy to get. But that type of stuff I try to avoid as much as possible, especially like the French fries that are deep fried in these seed oils. And it's a challenge even going out to eat these days. I'm kind of the annoying guy to the waiter. I'm the waiter's worst nightmare. What kind of oil is that cooked in, and this kind of thing. And sometimes you just tell them, hey, I'll just have the steak with just make it just put some salt and that's it and nothing else. And just and I know that at least I'm going to be clean there. But I'm really aware of these things because I know how, and I feel like so many of us in this industry, we've gone through our own pains and struggles with health. And so we know how bad you can feel and how good you can feel. I hope like a lot of people listening don't have to get to that level where they hit rock bottom, where they can actually you can feel so much better, and you don't want to hit rock bottom. Trust me. So, So any other maybe tips for parents with kids, or like, let's say you have kids who come into your practice and it's like, oh, they're showing signs of ADHD. Are you trying to recommend different foods for them?
Yeah, so this is a really great question. A couple of things to say. So one is, I'm not a child psychiatrist, so I don't see children in my practice. However, a lot of people in my practice are parents and they have children, and they're concerned about their children's mental health. If they themselves have depression or bipolar disorder, or schizophrenia, or ADHD, or whatever it is they have, they're worried, that their child might develop that they're more vulnerable to developing that as they grow older, or that they already have these conditions and they want to know what to do about them. So what I recommend as a non-child psychiatrist is, I always say, start with paleo first. Get as close to paleo as you can. I don't care whose plan you follow, Whole30, my plan, some paleo plan you find on the internet. It doesn't matter to me. Just learn those rules, what an actual whole foods paleo plan looks like. And that means getting out the grains, the legumes, the dairy products, and the refined carbohydrates, the seed oils, and all the processed foods. And if you do that, your child is going to be healthier than 95% of children on the planet. That's Whether right. They need to go any further is that remains to be seen. We're actually going to be, we've just launched a study with the Children's Mental Health Resource Council, and that I'm very honored to be part of, where children with bipolar disorder, we're going to see if we can, how hard it might be for families to improve the quality of their children's diets and get them as close to a ketogenic whole foods diet as they can. But we expect that many of these children may not be able to get all the way to a ketogenic diet, but they could at least follow whole foods paleo principles as their as the next best thing, and then see how well what's possible for those kids. Could those kids stabilize their mood? Do they need to go all the way to a ketogenic diet, or could simply cleaning up the diet and following these whole foods paleo principles be enough? Because these children, many of them, their brains are still growing. They're still very flexible. They're metabolically flexible. They don't have a lot of metabolic damage the way many of us adults do. Not as much metabolic damage as we do. They haven't as much time to accumulate that metabolic damage. Their brains are still really responsive and flexible. So wouldn't it be something if you could dramatically improve or put into remission a serious mental illness in children simply by following whole foods principles? I think that would be a wonderful thing to discover. So we're really excited to find out, how this goes.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. I can't wait to see the results of that. I remember when I first read about the Appleton food study,
Yes.
which is, really phenomenal. It was kind of youth that were struggling, and they replaced all the artificial food with at least whole food. And it wasn't even ketogenic. It was just whole food, right. Natural food. And the teachers, everyone, there was less incidences of kids acting out. The kids got better grades. They reported, they asked them, how many of you feel depressed before? They asked them after. And it was just like the numbers were incredible from the study. And that was just like a very simple switch. It wasn't even like going keto or anything. And certainly I do think the kids, especially if they're very active, have a lot more tolerance for, like, if my kids, it's like, yeah, eat all the fruits you want. You're active, you're running around. It's a little different. Me personally, I'm not going to eat grapes. I'm sticking to berries when it comes to fruits for the most part. But, the kids, I think, seem to tolerate a little bit more. So even if doesn't have to be full on keto, I think that might scare some people, but it's just going to this kind of whole food approach and prioritizing all the foods that you've mentioned. So yeah, This has been absolutely great. Dr. E, this has been amazing. Change Your Diet, Change Your Mind. That's the name of the book. What's the best place for people to buy it? And where can people follow you and learn more?
Yeah, I mean, you can buy it wherever books are sold. I personally like bookshop.org because it supports independent booksellers, but you can buy it wherever you like to buy books. And you can learn more about the book, as well as there are other free resources. There are a lot of free resources on my website. The website is called diagnosisdiet.com. And one of the free resources on the website, there's a tab called Clinician Directory. And that's so if people are looking for a clinician to support them in adopting a special diet for mental health treatment purposes, particularly if you're thinking about trying a ketogenic or carnivore diet, it's really important to consult with a knowledgeable clinician to guide you through that transition process, because the blessing and a curse of a ketogenic diet being a powerful intervention is that you want it to be powerful, and it is. But because it's a powerful intervention, it needs to be carefully monitored, especially in the first few weeks. It can affect medication levels. It can affect blood pressure, blood sugar levels. People can feel worse before they feel better. And all of this is avoidable, and you can make it all comfortable and safe. And you really improve your chances of success if you're working with somebody who knows how to approach this with the right training and skill. I teach a clinician training program in ketogenic diets for mental health, which is also in the website. But I'm imagining that most of your viewers would be consumers rather than clinicians. And if that's the case, I wanted to point them to that. It's a free clinician directory. It's international. You can search it. It's a database. You can search for prescribers and non-prescribers and coaches and nurses and psychiatrists and whatever kind of the therapist, whatever kind of support you're looking for. And it's growing every week. So please consult with somebody first before you make these major changes to your diet so that it'll be safe and comfortable and successful for you.
Yeah, I completely agree. And thank you for all that you're doing. You know, I've always thought that there's just been way too much overprescription going on and not enough looking at the root cause of issues and how we can address them. And so your book is doing that. The way that you are teaching other doctors and mental health practitioners how to do that through food is just such important work. So I can't thank you enough for the book and for all the work that you're doing. And it's just been an absolute pleasure to speak with you. I highly encourage everyone to check out your website, get on your newsletter on the website, and pick up the book. And I hope we can do this again soon. This has been absolutely a pleasure.
Me too, Talor, and thank you for being one of the first people to really spread the message about nutritional psychiatry years ago, and letting people know that they have more power over their mental health than they realize.
Thank you. Yes, it's certainly a passion of mine. And having guests like you, I don't consider this work. This is so much fun for me. I enjoy it. And we're spreading the word to thousands of people. So this is a beautiful thing. So thanks again. And we will talk to you soon.
Thanks a lot, Talor.
Thank you. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, can you please leave us a rating or review and subscribe? I've realized that while we have actually increased our downloads a lot, we're actually getting a lot of downloads, which I'm really happy about. We actually have very few ratings. And I realized that I've never asked people really to rate much. So I'm asking you now if you could please rate and review and subscribe. And if you enjoyed the episode, please forward it along to anyone that you think will get value out of this. Also, if you haven't checked out our line of products at buypeakperformance.com, you get 20% off your first order. That's www.buypeakperformance.com. We have some incredible products, including our organic high-altitude coffee. If you don't know this, coffee is one of the most heavily sprayed with pesticides out of any crop. So it's really important that you drink organic coffee. We've gone above and beyond to source what we believe is the highest quality and healthiest organic coffee in the world. We're also famous for our organic green superfood powder. You can get 20% off of that as well at buypeakperformance.com. We also have an organic vegan and paleo plant protein. See, most of the vegan proteins out there are using brown rice protein, which is really not a good source of protein, and it's also a grain. And if you're paleo, you know that grains tend to cause inflammation in some cases for some people. And so we wanted to make one that was paleo friendly and vegan and organic. We made an amazing amino acid profile, so it's really one of the best plant proteins for muscle building. So you can check out Peak Performance Organic Plant Protein. You can find that on our website. Of course, all our products are on Amazon as well. So thanks again. And again, please, if you enjoyed the episode, please forward it along to someone who you feel can get value out of it. And please leave us a rating, review, and subscribe. Thank you.